I found you on
Oh.
yoga,
Okay.
in this yoga journal, and I was so taken with your message.
Hmm.
And I had no idea that yoga could address the stress that has been brought on through trauma of ethnic race,
Right.
and you address that so beautifully.
So you're not alone in not knowing that, which is one of the reasons it was really important to me to give voice to that issue, because racial stress and trauma is not something that people have paid a lot of attention to in behavioral health, and certainly not in yoga, in the yoga world either. So yeah, so good.
And we're living at such a time when this message, I think, is just so important.
Yoga is a subversive practice. It's an inside out practice.
Mhm.
And when it is used mindfully and therapeutically, even when it's not, but when it's used that way, which is how I have used it and I've practiced it, it impacts the nervous system in such a way that it brings your nervous system into balance. When you are under chronic stress, which race-based traumatic stress is ongoing, cumulative, and recurrent. It's not a one-time event that happens and that's it. When you have adapted to living in stress, and I believe that we live in a culture that is, we live in a culture of unhealed stress and trauma, regardless of race. We do. So we are human doings, not human beings. We're always, we're moving quickly and everything has to be done and et cetera. At any rate, so what restorative yoga in particular does is it evokes the relaxation response, which is a real physiologic response, which Herbert Benson discovered or talked about, did research on in the 70s. And when the relaxation response is evoked, blood pressure drops, heart rate slows, brain waves slow, breathing becomes more efficient, and metabolism slows. And so the health benefits are clear. So it occurred to me as a Black woman, and also I've had the experience, that these practices could be and should be applied to issues of racial and ethnic stress and trauma. And so that is the theory. That's the theoretical foundation of the practice. And so that yoga is also, from my perspective and the way I practice, is more than a physical practice. It has become that in the Western culture. It's become kind of a form of exercise to be healthy, to look good, to be strong. But it was not intended to just be a physical practice. The intention of yoga originally was for it to be a practice that helps still the mind, that brings the mind to a sense of peace and calm, so that you can live a more fulfilled life, and a healthier life in that respect. So for me, it was easy for me to see that this is applicable. In addition to which, as I've said, I've had the experience. So personally.
So Gail, can you talk about your personal experience and what prompted you to develop a restorative yoga practice?
I've had many, but I will start. I'll start from the beginning. I started practicing yoga over 50 years ago.
Wow.
And there were no such things as yoga studios then, and there were hardly any such things as yoga teachers then. But I stumbled upon a yoga. I think I tell this part of this story in the Yoga Journal article.
You
but
do,
I found, yeah.
But I would love our readers to hear about it.
So from the beginning, I stumbled upon this yoga class that was being offered. I was living in Detroit at the time, and it was right after the Detroit riots had occurred. And so the city was in disarray, and the psyche of the residents of the city were really in trauma. Although but I wasn't thinking about it that way at the time. Anyway, I found this yoga class being offered at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Well, there were no such things as yoga mats, yoga clothes. That did not exist. And I found this class. I started taking the class, and I had such a deep sense of inner peace.
Mm.
And at the time, and I tell this in the article, I happened to be in a physically abusive relationship. That isn't why I started taking yoga, but I felt this sense of peace and calm. So I went religiously every week, because it was only offered once a week, to this class. And over time, by the end of the year, actually, it only lasted for a year, I found myself able and willing to admit, I'm in a bad situation here.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's something wrong with the person who's abusing me, but it occurred to me, but there's something wrong with me for putting up with it. And in that instant, I realized there's something I can do about me. There's nothing I can do about the other person. But what was amazing, and it's very difficult to explain this, the miracle of that experience was just having that awareness. And it was a deep, profound awareness. It wasn't a thought. It was a deep awareness. That man never lifted a finger to touch me again. Ever. I had, on some deep, fundamental level, I had shifted and realized I don't have to put up with this. And it was shortly after that I guess it took about a year for me to get out of the marriage, to get a divorce, at a time when no-fault divorce did not exist. It was very difficult to get divorces then. But I found someone who, was able to facilitate that.
Wait, I got chills.
Okay.
Are you saying that the minute you made your own shift, it changed the external reaction of this person?
That's what I'm saying.
I
That gives
love
me
that, because
chills.
that really talks to the vibration that we emit, and what we attract, and what is allowed to come into our into our being, into our world. And so that's why I love that phrase, awareness is curative.
And what I say is awareness is the medicine
Mhm.
of healing.
And
It
then
is.
it takes more, but it is the big catalyst to expand. So like you said, it wasn't like the guy started bringing you roses and,
No.
but something definitely shifted, and
And it was in me. I was
it was
done.
in you, and that,
I
yeah.
was done. And I couldn't have predicted that. Now, the caution in telling this story in this way is that if you are in an abusive relationship, it's not your fault.
Mm.
It is not your fault. It's not because you attracted it and because you want it.
Right.
And because you're doing something wrong. It is not that. And it's not your fault if you don't leave. I was giving a book talk. I had written a chapter for another book a few years ago. And a journalist came up to me after the talk, and I told this story. That was the whole point of the chapter that I wrote. And I told this story, and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "it was amazing. I wrote down what you said." I said, "What did I say?" She said, "You said, I did everything but leave." And it's true. And that is a dynamic in an abusive relationship. You do everything but leave. You get nicer, you try to avoid, you try to anticipate, sometimes you fight back, you do everything but leave. And it was in that moment of awareness that, wait a minute, I don't have to be here.
Right.
It was that was the shift in me. And then I took steps. I didn't say anything. I never said a word to him about it. I never said one single word. I never said one single word. And he stopped hitting me and walked away. It was just amazing to me.
Amazing.
And then I took the steps I needed to take to get a divorce. I went back to school. I got a divorce and got on with my life, but I kept that secret for almost 30 years. There was still that sense of shame that we carry when we find ourselves in abusive relationships. And so one of the things one of the results of racial abuse, stress, because that's what it is a sense when you internalize the abuse and conclude there's something wrong with me.
Right.
That somehow I have either made this happen or I shouldn't have allowed it to happen. See,
Yes.
it's that.
Yeah.
And that's your mind telling you a story about something. And that's for me what the value of yoga is when you're practicing, when you're doing more than the physical practice, you begin to realize, you start paying attention to your thoughts and you start noticing most of them are not worth paying attention to, and certainly not worth acting on, and certainly not worth even believing. And as your consciousness refines, then you change. It's really a very powerful practice. So restorative yoga, for those people who are not familiar with it, it's not an active form of yoga. It's a receptive form of yoga. And we use props, bolsters, pillows, blankets. And now that everybody's practicing at home, because most of the studios have closed, and I realize some are now reopening, but with all kinds of, protocols.
Right.
So you use these props to support the body in holding postures that you can hold for extended periods of time. And the focus is on the breath and on evoking the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, you've got your fight or flight nervous system. This one, I'm contracted aspect of self.
Right.
And then you have the rest and digest system, where you can just feel safe in stillness. When you're under stress, people who are under stress chronically do not feel safe being still. They feel safest when they're in this contracted state of being, except you don't even know you are, because you've adapted to it. If you've ever had a massage, for example, and you're just feeling really, really relaxed, and then bam, all of a sudden you drop into a deeper level of relaxation, and you think, and you didn't even know that you were tight. It's that.
Yes.
And that's what the restorative practice does. It supports us in dropping into these deeper levels of rest and recuperation and relaxation. So
I've only taken a yoga class where they wanted me to go faster or do more, and it was like 1,000 degrees or something. And, but it's so funny. My grandparents at age 70 discovered yoga, and they would stand on their heads for a really long time.
That's my favorite posture. Go ahead.
And my grandfather was a doctor in a very rough neighborhood in the Bronx, and he would make house calls. So there was a certain amount of fear or stress in that house. And by doing yoga, it totally changed them.
Well, let me just comment on that, because it's really important. What happens also is when one, I don't want to just reduce this to the nervous system, but when a calm nervous system meets another nervous system, guess what happens? We co-regulate each other. And so there's likelihood, and it's probably what happened when my former husband stopped hitting me, come to think of it. I was so calm. I have never been calmer.
Really?
Ever. I was just totally in that zone. And now that I think about it, that's probably what happened. There was no longer any fight left in him, because there wasn't any in me.
Because there was nothing to fight against for him.
No, and me either. I'm thinking, wait a minute. I know there's something wrong with him.
Right.
But you know what? I'm putting up with this. I can do something about that. And the relief just from that awareness. And it wasn't just a thought. Do you know what I mean? It was an awareness. It was a real awareness that came in the form of a thought.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably also, what kept your grandfather and the people he was visiting in a calm
Yeah.
receptive state.
And I never
So-
thought about it till talking with you.
Me either. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
interesting.
It's very interesting, which is one of the reasons, by the way, that this conversation, particularly around race and ethnicity, is so important, because we don't think about it unless we're engaged in conversation,
Right.
not a debate, not a search
Okay.
for agreement, but a real desire to connect heart to
Right.
heart.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's that. So,
Can we talk a little bit? Do you consider yourself an activist?
I used to say, I'm working with a lot of young people, because young people are the ones who are very engaged in yoga. And there's this very strong activist community in the yoga world these days, and period, in the world. So I was I was doing some talk, and I was saying that I was not an activist. And one of the young women said, "Oh yeah, you are. This is your activism." And again, like you saying, I never thought of this until we're having the conversation.
Mhm.
I realized, and I even write about it in the first book, I write about my father was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen.
Wow.
And for those people who don't know, the Tuskegee Airmen were the Black pilots who fought in World War II, and who were the bomber escorts that kept the plane safe.
Right.
Mhm.
And then he stayed in the military for his career. I grew up in that. My maternal grandmother was also an activist in terms of her commitment to politics and justice. And it was interesting. She was the first African-American woman to be made chief matron of the Wayne County Jail, which Wayne County is in Detroit.
Yeah.
I have letters from her prisoners, the inmates, thanking her for her kindness. And when she died, there was an article written about her. And one of the things she said is, I wanted to make sure these women understood that prison is not the worst place you can be.
Mm.
So she was, so yeah, so I guess to that extent, I am an
Yeah.
activist when it comes to bringing awareness to this really, really critically important topic. It's one important topic. There are lots of important topics,
Yeah.
but this one, I read, one of my good friends, who's a philosopher, said, there are lots of things that are important, but the choices we want to make, the question we want to ask ourselves, but is it relevant?
So timely.
Yeah,
So
I had nothing to do with that. So.
yeah.
Right.
And very applicable, because it is a stressful, we just seem to be having more to shoulder and understand and digest, and yeah.
Oh, I was just
No, go for it. You go.
So I was just going to say, I just got something when I posted this second book is available. I got a private message from someone who I don't know, saying, is this applicable to white people, or is this just for my least favorite acronym in the whole wide world, BIPOCs? I hate
Oh.
with everybody. So I'm not a fan, but anyway, but that was her language, or is it just for BIPOCs? So here's the thing, is from my perspective, whether you are the recipient of racial stress and trauma, or the one who is causing it,
Right.
or the one who's bystanding and looking at it,
Mhm.
we are all impacted by this. This is not just for Black people or brown people. This is white people are involved in this too. And my thinking is, if you can't even have the conversation without getting defensive,
Mhm.
or then that's a problem. There's something wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think that requires self-examination. So that's what both of these books are, invite all of us who are interested, for whom this is a relevant topic, and you don't have to be Black or brown for it to be relevant, to begin to take a look at, how am I impacted by all this stuff?
Mhm.
Am I afraid of Black people? Have I learned to be? Probably. I mean, we were bombarded with messages. My husband and I were coming home from a dinner when my son was with us, and we were coming into our condominium complex. A white gentleman was coming out. He looked at us. He said, we were putting our key in the gate to go in. He said, well, I guess I'll let you in because I guess you're not criminals. Now, that might sound to some people like, well, why wouldn't he say that? But if you're Black in America and you're stereotyped as a criminal, and you have two men with you, a husband and a son,
Mhm.
it is a very threatening thing to hear.
Right.
And so it's that. And so my husband said, no, we're not. We're a physician, a psychologist, and an attorney. And the man, he said, oh,